Hey, hello Cloud Gurus, and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to look at autoscaling. Now, autoscaling is probably worth at least 3 to 4 marks in the Solutions Architect exam. So understanding it, its various components, and the different types of autoscaling is crucial in order to passing your exam. So we're going to start off with a theory lecture. We'll look at all the different aspects of autoscaling, and in the next lecture, we'll go in and we'll go and do a lab on autoscaling. So autoscaling consists of 3 different components. We have groups, configuration templates, and then our different scaling options. So groups are just logical components. You might have your web server group or your application group or your database group. It's just a logical component where you're going to put your EC2 instances in. We then have configuration templates. So each group always uses a launch template or a launch configuration as a configuration template for its EC2 instances. So it's basically the instructions on what EC2 instances to launch, what size they are, how much storage, etc., etc. So you can specify information such as the AMI ID, instance type, the key pair, the security groups, and the block device mappings for your instances. We then have our different scaling options, and this provides several ways for you to scale your auto-scaling groups. For example, you can configure a group to scale based on the occurrence of a specified condition. So this is called dynamic scaling. It might be your CPU utilization, for example. Or you can specify that you want your group to scale on a schedule. It might be that everyone gets into work at 9 a.m. in the morning on Monday morning, and you need to have excess capacity for that event. So what are your scaling options? Well, there's 5 different scaling options. There's maintain the current instance levels at all times. There's scale manually. There's scale based on a schedule. There's scale based on demand, and then there's using predictive scaling. And let's go through and have a look at each one. So maintain your current instance levels at all times. So you can configure your auto-scaling groups to maintain a specified number of running instances at all times. So you might say, hey, I want a minimum of 10 instances at all times. And to maintain the current instance levels, Amazon EC2 auto-scaling performs a periodic health check on your instances within an auto-scaling group. And when it finds an unhealthy instance, it's going to terminate that instance and then launch a new one. So maintain your current instance levels at all times is the first type of scaling option. We then have scale manually, and manual scaling is the most basic way to scale your resources, where you specify only the change in the maximum, minimum, or desired capacity of your auto-scaling group. So in this example, we've got 4 web servers, and we might say, hey, I want only 3 web servers. So let's scale down to 3 web servers. And so Amazon EC2 Autoscaling manages the process of creating or terminating instances to maintain the updated capacity. You might want to scale down to 2 instances, etc. We then have scale based on a schedule. And this is scaling by schedule, means that the scaling actions are performed automatically as a function of date and time. So you just say, hey, Monday morning, 9 a.m., I want you to scale to 10 instances, something like that. And this is useful when you know exactly when to increase or decrease the number of instances in your group, simply because the need arises on a predictable schedule. We then have scaling on demand. This is pretty much the most popular type of auto-scaling. It's one that almost everyone uses. It's a more advanced way to scale your resources. So using scaling policies, which let you define the parameters that control the scaling process. So for example, let's say you have a web application that currently runs on 2 instances, and you want the CPU utilization of the auto-scaling group to stay at around 50% when the load on the application changes. This method is useful for scaling in response to changing conditions when you don't know what those conditions are going to be. So you can set up Amazon EC2 Autoscaling to respond for you, and we're going to do this in the next lab. And then finally, we can use predictive scaling. This is relatively new, but you can use Amazon EC2 Autoscaling in combination with AWS Autoscaling to scale resources across multiple services. And AWS Autoscaling can also help you maintain optimal availability and performance by combining predictive scaling and dynamic scaling, so proactive and reactive approaches respectively, to scale your EC2 instances capacities faster. So just bear that in mind as well. Predictive scaling is, it's basically predicting based on your previous performance when you are going to need scaling options. So that is it for this lecture, everyone. Like I always say, the best way to learn something is to go in and do do it. So we're going to do that in the next lab. Just remember going into your exam, the different scaling options. So there's 5. So maintain current instances at levels at all time, scale manually, scale based on a schedule, scale based on demand, or use predictive scaling. So that's it for this lecture, everyone. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture.